You're listening to the Multiverse Fancast, proud member of the Misfit Faction Media Network. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Multiverse Fancast. Don't forget, if you guys are listening to us on the go, you can find us on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, basically anywhere you get your podcast. You can also find more of our content on our website, themisfitfaction.com. There you find links to not only this show, but some of our other shows, like MF Uncensored and Cinematic Adventures. You can also find news, reviews, articles, and more, so make sure you guys check out themisfitfaction.com. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Paul. With me via the Zoom studio is Ronnie. Ronnie, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, sir?
I'm doing spectacular.
Ha, 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 ha.
Too
The
soon?
puns are going to be unlimited.
That was pretty uncanny, actually. That one didn't work. No, I just panicked and picked another X-Men. So if you guys haven't discovered from the title of the episode, the description of the episode, and the terrible puns that we're already dropping, we decided to have a little bit of fun, and this was an episode that we teased in our last animated series, Battle Royale type, where we are going to pit Spider-Man and the X-Men together against each other. Our primary focus is going to be, first, the Spider-Man 90s and X-Men 90s animated shows, compare, contrast, talk about the two of them, because they did exist in the same universe. They were in continuity with each other, which is we'll talk about also. And then we're going to talk a little bit more early 2000s with the Spectacular Spider-Man and X-Men Evolution. And Ronnie has definitely seen all of both, and I mean all shows.
All of all.
All of these shows. He has seen every single episode. He could probably recite them, but he's going to rely on me to keep the show going.
Yes, I don't want to do too much.
I don't want to hurt myself. It's my curse, you know? But anyway, So let's start off with Spider-Man in the 90s. Do you remember watching the show as a kid?
So when I was a kid, I wasn't too big into cartoons other than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So I do remember watching like episodes here and there. And then obviously when I was older, kind of watching more, if not like all of both 90s shows that we're going to be talking about.
Now, so the Spider-Man animated show, I know we've talked about it in like some of our Spider-Man focused episodes, but this show is such a unique beast because it had so many rules that it had to follow. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, well, Fox's X-Men series was being produced by Saban. Spider-Man was produced by the newly formed Marvel Films Animation. It was the only series that the in-house studio produced, but it was animated by the TMS Kyochi Corporation. So there's, wow, that one hurt. All right. The show was very famous for its censorship. And the reason was, the show came out in 1990, I want to say 4. It ran from November 1994 to January 31st, 1998. So it got about, I want to say, 5 seasons it did.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Great show. It's a ton of episodes, usually about 20 episodes per season. I remember all the episodes were titled comic books and they were chapters and like all these things. So really good stuff with that. But at the time, we also had a lot of violence, quote unquote, on television. Now, we look back on it now and, you know, no, like it's nothing. But this was also the biggest time where Power Rangers was humongous. It was a titan in media. So Power Rangers was, of course, called out for the violence that it depicted, where it's teenagers fighting monsters very physically, killing monsters. Like, nobody ever talks about how they're actually destroying living beings every episode.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in an attempt to kind of placate the parents, but also keep the show on, they censored almost everything. And some of the dumbest things. And I remember as a kid hearing some of the words, and I was like, it's so weird. Like, I don't know what's going on. But apparently, Marvel had no creative control on the TV series because Marvel at the time was in tough times and was close to bankruptcy, which is crazy to think about now. But here are some of the ways that Spider-Man, the animated series, was censored. I can't even read some of these. Some episodes, realistic guns were depicted, but only as flashbacks. They were never shown shooting or being used. The Punisher, they never show his family actually dying, and they never use the word killed. Let's see. No punching. Spider-Man never throws. He throws one punch, and they manage to get around it by using the Spot of all characters, who's now super popular, where he punches through one of the spots and hits him. It's the only time Spider-Man is actually connected with a punch. You can't throw people through glass, no putting children in jeopardy, and no vampires were allowed to actually feed on humans. And you couldn't say words like sinister, blood. So they used, like, I think they called the Sinister Six the Insidious Six instead, because that's a much better word for kids, I guess. Instead of blood, they always said plasma. So when they introduced Morbius the Living Vampire, and it wasn't Jared Leto, for anybody who's curious. Darn, right? But and he would drink plasma, and he had like suction cup things on his hands, and that's how he would do it. Carnage was introduced and doesn't kill an actual person. He just drains their life force.
Yeah.
So what do you think about censorship in terms of cartoons, especially in the 90s?
I don't know, like, to me, it was kind of stupid because, again, like, instead of saying blood, you're saying plasma. So basically what they're doing is they're using synonyms for these words.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so they're still saying blood by saying plasma. Like, they're still saying killed by saying sucking the life force out of them. Like, but those are things, like, as kids, you know, or I was, what, like 5 when the show came out. So it's like, did I know plasma meant blood? No, I thought, like, whoa, that person's got plasma in them and said blood. You know what I mean? Like, things like that. So back then, like, it worked because, like I said, as kids, we didn't understand what they were saying.
Right.
But now as adults, we're like, plasma is blood. Sucking the life force out of someone is killing them. Like,
I liked how all the cops had laser guns. Instead of guns, they had laser guns.
Yeah, which I feel like does more damage than a bullet would, but okay.
No, it's fine. It's fine. We're all good. They couldn't use the phrase radioactive. So even though he was bitten by a radioactive spider, I forget what they actually used, but they had like a recurring machine that they would, that was like a plot point. It was the neogenic recombulator or something totally made up. But as a kid, I thought all this was real science. I was like, wow, look what they could do. But so let's go really quick through the cast, because the cast is fantastic. They have a huge cast, and they have some big names, surprisingly. As the titular character is Christopher Daniel Barnes. I was a big fan of him from some of his other works. Are you familiar with Christopher Daniel Barnes?
Not really.
Yes, you are, because haven't you seen The Little Mermaid?
No.
The original Little
Mermaid? The new one?
No, the original.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking about the new one.
He played Prince Eric.
At
the age of 16. I think he lied to them or something like that. And then he was also Greg Brady in the Brady Bunch movie and the Very Brady sequel.
That's funny.
Yeah, I loved him in this role. He definitely got a lot of time to make the character his own, and he could yell. Like when the scenes where Spider-Man like yelled in like anguish, God, he had some pipes.
Yeah.
So we have Jennifer Hale. I remember Jennifer Hale as Felicia Hardy / the Black Cat. Saratoga Ballantyne as Mary Jane Watson. Ed Asner. Ed Asner is J. Jonah Jameson. And he was great in the role. Rodney Salisbury as Robbie Robertson. Linda Gray as May Parker. Julie Bennett as May Parker for the second half of the show. Joseph Campanella as the Lizard. And Dr. Kirk Connors. Gary Imhoff as Harry Osborn, Neil Ross as Norman Osborn, and ironically, they both did the Goblin voices too, respectively. Roscoe Lee Brown as Wilson Fisk / the Kingpin. Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Dr. Octopus. Hank Azaria as Eddie Brock / Venom. For a lot of kids, that was the definitive Venom and the definitive like black suit saga. Mark Hamill as the Hobgoblin, and Joan Lee, the wife of Stan Lee, as Madam Web. So that's an awesome cast.
Oh, yeah.
And the amount of cameos that they had in that show, like they had the Punisher, they had Daredevil, they had the X-Men, Captain America cameos, the Fantastic Four, like they go all out for this show. And one of the things that this show actually did way earlier than Spider-Verse was create their own Spider-Verse style team-ups. Yeah. So the biggest ones were they did Secret Wars, which they got a bunch of heroes versus a bunch of villains. Doctor Doom's there, like the Beyonders, the guy. based off the comic books. And then they did Spider Wars, where they had different versions of Spider-Man all team up. So I will say that this show, for me, I'm gonna give it that 4.5. Almost, I think maybe if it wasn't so censored, I think I'd probably give it the 5.
Wow.
Oh, I love the
That's
show.
big.
I was
That
obsessed with
is
the show.
big.
Well, because this show was targeted towards us. The show was
Yeah.
based around the toys. The toys were put into production way before, and they based the show off the toys. And we've seen it before with like, especially like another show like Young Justice that got canceled because of bad toy sales. So for me, like this was my superhero show.
Mhm.
What about you?
So I'm sure back then, if back in '98 when it was over, I'd tell you 4.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Looking back at it, I'd probably still give it a 4.5. It could be a 4 just because of censorship and, like, which I guess you can't really blame it nowadays for that. But I mean, it's a 4.5. Back then, that style was, these styles, for the mid to late '90s, having virtually like no budget and it looking as good as it did.
Oh yeah, it
Um,
was the first show to start using CGI.
yeah. So yeah, I would say 4.5.
Solid.
There's obviously everything has room for improvement. There's not too many fives out there, especially when it comes to TV show, just because of longevity. Like,
Mm-hmm.
in 5 years, was it perfect for all 5 years kind of thing? No,
I could,
that's why I wouldn't say it's a five to me, but
I don't know.
it's definitely.
I could argue it.
Yeah, are you sure about that?
I think I really could. But now, one of the biggest reasons we did this was because these shows, Spider-Man and X-Men, again, existed in the same universe. So I believe I want to say it was like season 2 or 3 of Spider-Man. He didn't cross over to X-Men. I think he did like a brief cameo and like a background shot or something like that.
Hmm.
But he crossed over to. Also, this was the first time I saw Blade in Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, big fan. And oh yeah, here we go. It's season 2, episode 4, chapter 4, The Mutant Agenda. And then it follows up in chapter 5, Mutant's Revenge. And basically, Spider Man's dealing with his own mutation, and he thinks that if he goes over to the X Men in Westchester, because he's in New York, it's perfect. I don't know how he swung there, but he got there.
Yeah. Right.
And basically, he goes there to be like, I need a cure. And they're like, that's not what we do here. We teach you how to be a mutant and be happy. And they're like, no, I don't like this. So that
Yeah.
was the first interaction. And then on September 30th, 1995, wow. And I still remember it's a cliffhanger episode with Spider-Man and Wolverine fighting each other because that's what heroes did, and the Hobgoblin's about to blow them up. Remember that as a kid, traumatizing. But then you fast forward, and then Storm cameos in the Secret Wars. They wanted to get the entire cast again, but it was way too expensive because they would record at different studios.
Yeah.
So to get the entire cast over there just wasn't worth the budget. But we have X-Men rolls around, and first and foremost, we have to determine which show had the better theme song.
Oh.
I'm gonna give it to X-Men. It's super
I was gonna
iconic.
say I'm gonna give it to X-Men for the two '90s shows. Yeah, X-Men.
Yeah. So this show was released earlier than Spider-Man. Spider-Man came out in 94, went to 98. This show was 1992 to 1997. It ended the day before my birthday in 1997. It's my fault, guys. I'm sorry.
Good job. Or
But
is it your fault or is it your parents' fault for not getting you the toys?
probably both. But anyway, actually, here you ready? Here's a terrible story, and this is a true story. And you can ask, Ronnie, you know my dad. You can ask him about this. When I was a kid, I had to have been like 5 when this show was like just rolling out. It's at its most popular. My dad got me a display set of X-Men action figures, and it was like the entire
Oh.
cat. I was 5, so I begged him to take them out of the display. My dad to this day still claims that it would have been worth so much money had we not touched it. I was like, I don't think so. But anyway, as I have my framed Parents of Wolverine hanging up on the wall. But anyway, so what do you remember about this show?
I think the big things I remember about the show are the theme,
Hmm.
right? And also their costumes.
Oh yeah, the costumes were
I,
great.
I mean, I don't think in any other show or even in the movies we have seen anything quite like it. Like obviously, like yeah, he kind of with time looks get better, but the way they all looked in it, they all looked different, but they all had some sort of X on them to signify they're part of the X Men.
And it was also like their
Um,
communicators, like that's what they would press to talk to each other.
yeah, I don't know. I just think the looks of their costumes and everything were like beautiful, spot on. And like I said, I don't think we've ever really had anything close to that since.
So it also breaks my heart that the last shot of, I want to say it was X-Men, not Days of Future Past, but maybe X-Men Apocalypse. The last shot is them in their in their cartoon accurate suits, and then we
Yeah,
never see them again. Like it
yeah,
was heartbreaking to see like the actual adaptation, and they looked pretty good. The suits looked fine, because that was a big issue with the X-Men in the live action. They thought that the suits would not translate well to screen. And now
mm,
we're at a time where you have a Professor X is in his comic accurate wheelchair. Hugh Jackman's reprising the role of Wolverine in the yellow suit. Like nobody cares anymore.
no.
Like I get it at like early 2000s. They're like we're also early 2000s was a lot of leather.
Yeah,
Yeah, like the Matrix,
yeah.
Underworld. Everybody
Like
was
that would have been perfect.
like I thought I was supposed to grow up and buy leather. Nowadays,
I mean, I had the leather assless chaps.
you still do. That's what you wear when you record. It's very awkward. Please don't stand up
You want
again.
to see, guys?
No,
No.
no. That's why we don't do video for this podcast. Anyway, that's an MF Uncensored. Anywho. So,
Anywho,
all right then. We have the show. Jesus Christ. Anyway. All right. So let me go through the cast of this show. Well, actually, my first memory. So I remember I didn't watch this show as much live because it was a lot harder when we were kids to catch live, especially we were young when this show came out, 5 or 6, like
yeah.
trying to time that for a 5 or 6 year
That
old.
between nap time.
Muppet Babies is on, but anyway. So we were kind of in a weird spot with that, and also this show is a little bit more mature. Like Morph dies, quote unquote, in like the first 2 episodes. But
Yeah.
so for me, I remember seeing a lot of reruns. I had tapes, and so I only had like 12 episodes total, and I would just
Mm.
rewatch those same 12 episodes. Like something different was going to happen each time.
Yeah.
But for me, like, I still love this show, and I have, obviously caught up. And it followed a very similar kind of setup to Spider-Man, where they picked sagas. Notoriously, they did the Phoenix Saga, and they did it incredibly. Like, to the point where it was considered the best adaptation, especially considering we've now had 2 film adaptations of Dark Phoenix, and it has
But
sucked. But for us, let's see. We have as the cast, because the X-Men had a little bit more of an ensemble type cast. You have Professor Xavier, played by Cedric Smith. Scott Summers / Cyclops, played by Norm Spencer. Jean Grey, played by Catherine Disher. Storm, played by Iona Morris for the first 2 years, and then Allison Seeley Smith for the remainder of the show. Wolverine, played by Cal Dodd, who again turned into the star of the show. Gambit, played by Chris Potter in the first half of the show, and then Tony Daniels for the last season, who was also another scene stealer. I loved Gambit, and that's where I got introduced to a lot of these characters. Rogue, played by Lenora Zan. Jubilee, who was supposed to be like the main character and like the audience surrogate, because she kind of gets thrown into this world after her mutant powers develop, and that she's played by Allison Court. Hank McCoy, or Beast, played by George Buza, who apparently, and this is a mild spoiler, does cameo in the Marvels. But anyway. And Magneto, played by David Hembelin. Just some other characters. I'm not going to go by their cast name, but just some of the characters that appear. You have Bishop, you have Cable, you have Christopher Summers, you have Juggernaut. Oh, I remember all the Juggernaut episodes. You had Mastermind, Apocalypse, Mr. Sinister, Dr. Moira McTaggart, The Blob, Colossus, Senator Kelly, Mystique. Let's see. A lot of different characters played different, or a lot of different actors played the same characters.
Yeah.
Cannonball, Henry Gyrich. Let's see.
Marvel.
What was that?
Miss Marvel.
Is Miss Marvel in this? Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, because Rogue steals her powers in this. That's right. Sabretooth, Quicksilver, Famine, Pyro, Bolivar Trask. You said Miss Marvel. Those are some of the biggest ones. All right,
Yeah.
and Angel / Archangel. I remember that one too. Banshee. They had a ton of good ones, and then they had episodes with cameos because they did like Days of Future Past. They did all sorts of episodes, and it was fantastic. Like it was getting 23 million views an episode. Like it was a monster.
Yeah.
So for me, though, again, I think I just wasn't old enough at the time to catch it. So I'm going to give, even though this show is fantastic, I'm going to give it the 4, and I'm going to put Spider-Man above it.
All right. I'm gonna agree with you. I think this is like slightly below Spider-Man the animated series. 4, 4, 5 is a big gap, but like in my mind, it's closer than that.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a 4 again. The between the theme, the look of their costume and stuff like that, like to be able to do not only their costumes but also their powers too.
Oh,
And
yeah.
back in the 90's, this is more like the early 90's too than Spider-Man was, not by much, but to be able to do all that and to make it look again for its time like outstanding.
Mhm.
I think it just shows like how great this was written and done. So yeah, I would say a 4, maybe closer to the 4, 5 end of it, like a 4.25, which I know you hate when that
I do
happens.
hate when that
uh
happens. That's why we don't have those ratings.
I know that's what I'm saying, like it's closer to a 4, 5 than to a 4
You're closer to a 4.5 than a 2.5.
though.
All right, with that, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are then going to tackle the early 2000s with the Spectacular Spider-Man and X-Men Evolution. But first, a quick break. Hey guys, it's Paul, and the Misfit Faction is looking for your help. We are trying to grow not only our network, but also grow our brands, and the best way to do that is if you guys are looking to start your very own podcast. Maybe you guys have been listening to us for a while, maybe it's something you guys have always wanted to do, but you're not sure how to get started. If you go to podbean.com/misfitfaction, you guys will get a month of free podcasting on us. That is a gift from us. So make sure if you guys are looking to start your own show, you reach out to us and go to podbean.com/misfitfaction. Also, maybe you guys have your own online business or service that you're always looking to grow, and advertising is a very big part of that. If you guys go to sponsorship.podbean.com/misfitfaction, you guys can get $100 worth of free advertising, again, as a thank you from us to you guys. That's sponsorship.podbean.com/misfitfaction. All right, we are back, and now the debate shifts gears to the early 2000s. That was a time where Ronnie was cutting class, and I was just not caring as much.
Yeah, you're right.
So there is a little bit of a gap. We just found that this was a very similar in vein to the two shows. So we have Spectacular Spider-Man that came out in 2008, and we have X-Men Evolution that came out in 2000. But they had about the same amount of, I think, Spider-Man had 2 seasons, X-Men Evolution had 4, 52 total episodes for X-Men, 26 for Spectacular Spider-Man. And the reason we picked these shows is because they're arguably super iconic, or they're super culty in terms of just the fandoms. Like Spectacular Spider-Man has a huge cult following, and mostly because of all the controversy about it. And controversy in terms of not the show, but per se the actual what happened behind the scenes. You want to start Spectacular Spider-Man or X-Men Evolution? You pick.
Let's go Evolution because we started with Spider-Man in the first half of the show.
All right, so X-Men Evolution aired November 4th of 2000 to October 25th of 2003. Like I said, it had 4 seasons, 52 total episodes, and this show does something very different where they go back and put the kids all in high school. So even though they are at Xavier's gifted school, they are also like now going to high school, and it's very strange how they're out of school but also going to school. So the main cast for the beginning of the show, we had Professor Xavier, played by David Kaye, Cyclops by Kirby Morrow, Jean Grey by Venus Terzo, Spike, who was an original character created for the show, played by Neil Dennis, Wolverine by Scott McNeil, and ironically, Wolverine takes a bit of a back seat. Wolverine and Storm are teachers at the school. So they're more side characters. Storm, played by Kristen Williamson, Rogue, played by Megan Black, Kitty Pryde, played by Maggie Blue O'Hara, Kurt Wagner, also known as Nightcrawler, played by Brad Sawali, and Hank McCoy, played by Mike Copassa. So those were the biggest names of the cast, like the main X-Men roster. Throughout the course of the show, they do expand. They introduce the New Mutants in a much better way than the movie did. You have Angel jumps in at some, They also defect some of the brotherhoods. Like I think Colossus and Gambit were actually bad guys when they're first introduced, but then they defect. So
Yeah.
the show had a very big cast starting. I think it was around season 2-ish. So
Hmm.
yeah, for me, I was a huge fan of the show. I think it was a smart move, and that's the other reason we compare this and Spectacular Spider-Man, because they bring it back to a very simpler time and then expand outwards.
Yeah.
So like in the first season, nobody knows that mutants exist. So the whole point is like trying to keep that secret under wraps, and that's why they have such a limited number. They also have some of the bad guys, like the Brotherhood was Magneto, who was always in the shadows and very mysterious. Mystique, who was the main quote unquote bad guy, who also played like pretended to be their principal
Yeah.
and would mess with them. You had Toad, Avalanche, the Blob, Quicksilver, and then eventually the Scarlet Witch, and she was
Yeah.
like the most powerful, of course, out of all of them. So in season one, like I said, they're all high school students. They're just kind of living their best lives, and trying to deal with all of that. And it ends with Magneto like super powering all the Cyclops and his brother Havoc, who he discovers is alive. And it's a great, like they do some good adaptations of it. And for me, like this was my show. I really did dig this show. I was kind of bummed that it only lasted the 4 seasons.
Yeah. It again with this show and even with the first X-Men show that we talked about, you don't have big names like you kind of did with, the Spider-Man
Mm-hmm.
shows. There's a lot less well-known people voicing in these shows, especially with this one, with Evolution. To me, I wasn't too big of a fan of this show.
You break my heart.
I know, I'm sorry.
It's because it wasn't a Wolverine show.
No, not because it was a Wolverine show. I think because it's one of those like I don't know. I think I'm expecting more action to it, and it's a lot more storytelling.
I will disagree
That
with you, sir. It had some of the best action set pieces, and one of my favorites is, I want to say it's season 3. So at the end of
hmm
season 2, people find out that, like, the general public finds out that mutants exist,
Yeah,
and Professor Xavier's missing. Mystique's been portraying him, and he's captured. I forget where. I think he's in like a government building or something, but
yeah,
the Juggernaut escapes, and they have to fight the Juggernaut without the help of Professor Xavier, who uses like his mental powers, and they manage to take him down. And Cyclops has one of my favorite moments of all time, where like Juggernaut's like, "You can't stop me, I'm raw power," and he's like, and he takes off his visor. I forget what he says, but he says like a badass line. Takes off his visor, and it just like explodes and sends Juggernaut flying. It's really
yeah,
cool. But again, I think that this show, it didn't focus on Wolverine, and that's what people wanted. That's why the successor, X Wolverine and the X-Men, was literally Wolverine and the X-Men.
yeah,
So the show did end on like they definitely knew that it was going to end. We also had an original character by the name of X-23 created for the show. So popular that they put her into the comics, and they also, of course, put her into the Logan movie played by Daphne Keane. Rumor is she's coming back too for Deadpool, but we'll see. There's too many rumors for Deadpool. I can't handle them all.
God,
But
I just can't wait for that movie.
the show does end with they do their apocalypse story, and it ends with Xavier getting a glimpse of the future. And some of the things that he
Yeah,
sees are continued anti-mutant sentiment at Capitol Hill, a reformed Magneto as an instructor at the Xavier Institute, Jean Grey with the Phoenix Force and the Dark Phoenix, the future X-Men team being Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Shadowcat, Storm, Beast, Iceman, Colossus, X-23, and Rogue, who's now flying. The Brotherhood joining, including Pyro, joining S.H.I.E.L.D. as the Freedom Force. Nimrod the Sentinel, and they do the entire cast photo. So they knew they were ending, and I think that that worked in their favor. So
yeah.
I'm going to give this show, for the second half, I'm going to give it a 4.5.
Wow.
Yeah, it
So
is.
you like this better than the first?
Then the 90s X-Men? Probably. But no, what did I say? I thought I said 4.5 for the.
No, you said four for
Oh, I
X-Men.
did. Yes, I do like. I think I was also the right age for this show. I think I
Yeah.
was like 13, 14 ish.
hmm
So
All right. Interesting. I think this is. I'm gonna give this a four, which is I know it's the same as X-Men the animated series, but to me this is again, like I said in the first half, X-Men, the animated series, is closer to a 4.5 than to a 4, while this is like a 4, hands down. I don't know, I just didn't find it as appealing. I wasn't drawn to it as much as the original
Mm-hmm.
show was. The looks of everybody kind of was jarring at times, especially with, way Wolverine looks with like orangey instead of yellow. And I don't know, I think I'm just a sucker for nostalgia and original stuff that this kind of threw me off.
All right, I'll allow your opinion. I don't believe in it, but I'll allow it.
All I ask.
Oh, okay. That's not too much to ask then. All right, so let's jump across the pond, the Marvel pond, to the Spectacular Spider-Man. Again, another show so popular. So we didn't even mention that the X-Men '90s show is getting a revival. X-Men '97 is gonna premiere in Disney Plus sometime this year, supposedly 2024, and there's a lot of fan excitement for it. Now, on the opposite end, there is still a Save the Spectacular Spider-Man movement going on.
Yeah.
Hashtag Save Spectacular Spider-Man, especially after they released it on Netflix for a while. Like, they're still talking about it. And obviously, Josh Keaton was so popular, Spider-Man, that he appeared in Spider-Verse.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was one of the Spider-Men that I think he has a couple of lines too. So, this show, super, super popular. It only lasted 2 seasons. And again, there was a lot of issues with the problem you had were there were production issues that were going on. There were supposed to be 5 seasons. They wanted to do 65 episodes, and the ratings were a little less than. All right. But then they
Yeah.
also, the problem with Spider-Man is they have to constantly create new Spider-Man shows because of all their rights and legal issues and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, so what happened was in 2009, in exchange for concessions on the movie rights, Sony had relinquished to Marvel its license to produce television works that used Spider-Man and associated characters, but had retained the ownership of Spectacular Spider-Man and all the production elements used, such as character designs and stories. So they were like, well, we'll just make a new one. Done. We win.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to Spider-Man, it always comes down to money. But let's run through the cast really quick. We had Josh Keaton playing Peter Parker / Spider-Man, Lacey Chabert as Gwen Stacy, James Arnold Taylor as Harry Osborn, Darren Norris as J. Jonah Jameson and John Jameson, Vanessa Marshall as Mary Jane Watson, Joshua Labar as Flash Thompson, Alana Ubach as Liz Allen, Clancy Brown as George Stacy, and Alex Rachines as Norman Osborn. Some other characters that make appearances. Ed Asner as Ben Parker. That's fun. All right, I'm going to run through these quick. We had the Tinkerer, Ben Parker, Kurt Connors, Jean DeWolf, Shocker, Mysterio, Green Goblin, Chameleon, Calypso, Billy Connors, Silver Sable, Crusher Hogan, the Big Man, let's see, Betty Brant, Sandman, Eddie Brock and Venom, Hobie Brown, Adrian Toomes the Vulture, Maury Bench, Silvermane, Electro, Dr. Kafka, Miles Warren, Dr. Bromwell, Black Cat, let's see, Ned Leeds, Robbie Robertson and Rand Robertson, Mark Allen, Joan Jameson, Dr. Octopus, Walter Hardy, who in this show is the one that killed Uncle Ben by accident, L. Thompson Lincoln, Dr. Martha Connors and Anna Watson, May Parker, Glory Grant, Ox, Roderick Kingsley, Craven the Hunter, Mayor Waters, Donald Mencken, and Stan Carter. Woof. So
Everybody and everybody.
I know pretty much. They had a stacked cast, and
Yeah.
I will say that this show has probably one of my favorite theme songs of all time.
100%.
It is so good. To the point where I think I've used it on a couple of our reels too on Instagram.
I'm sure you have.
Check that out, the Misfit Faction Media Network on Instagram. But it's the catchiest theme song of all time. To the point where when it was only on Netflix for a hot minute, and I watched the entire thing just because they're 22 minutes, like they're easy.
I did too. Yeah.
And I rarely skipped the intro because I just loved it so much.
Yeah.
I also have to say that I loved how they did the black suit, how it changed throughout the show. And I think in all, because at first they had it looking like his suit, which they did in the Spider-Man movies. And I was like, oh, but then it progressively got more and more. I was like, oh, it looks so cool now. And they did a great job with him and Venom in that story. But what are your highlights from the show?
Again, like you said, the theme song is I think the best theme song we've had when it comes to superhero stuff. It is so catchy, and then I think the storytelling in it, the looks of it, for late 2000s, and it's so memorable. Like you have all these big named, characters and bad guys of Spider-Man in here, and it works. It was almost like there was storytelling, but also like you had your flavor of the week, your enemy of the week or whatever. But it worked, um, and it's just great just to see where it was back in the early '90s to now, and the way it changed, but also kind of stayed true to itself at the same time.
Right. I liked how Spider-Man wasn't nearly as strong as he was in the comics. Like he had to really think his way out of most of his problems. He relied a lot more on his webbing too, which was another thing different in this show. But you were constantly, it's the same thing for these two shows, both this and X-Men Evolution. You were dealing also with high school problems. And I think, like I said, this show came out a little after you and I graduated high school.
Yep.
So like I know I graduated 05, you were what, 06 or 07?
7.
Nerd. But anyway.
Yep.
So like we were just finishing high school when this show started.
Yeah.
And I think it was easier for us to relate to it, just like because it's high school, like it's the same kind of issues, but now you're also dealing with superpowers. So for me, I think that was also a big part. And this show had so many things they wanted to do. They wanted to do Scorpion, Hydra Man, Hobgoblin, Carnage, Mr. Negative, Morbius. Like they had a ton of stuff, and this was all planned. And like literally they just got
Disney.
Yeah, thanks, Disney. Like to the point where Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes was airing from 2010 to 2012, and they had an episode with Spider-Man. And originally, Josh Keaton did all the voice work. And in a fit of fan rage, also because fans were pissed about this, they had Drake Bell redub all the lines because he was playing the Ultimate Spider-Man at the time, and they wanted to promote that. And you could, I watched a little bit of Ultimate Spider-Man. It wasn't my cup of tea. But you could tell the lines were written for Josh Keaton's Spider-Man as opposed to Drake Bell. I'm sure he did a fine job. He's a terrible person in real life, but I'm sure he did a fine job doing his job. But for me, like this show was pinnacle, and I will give it also the rare 5.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Again, to me, it's hard to give 5s out. The only 5 I'm pretty sure I've ever given out has been Winter Soldier, and it's going to stay that way.
That's fair.
I'll give this a solid 4 or 5. To me, it is better than the original one, right?
Mm-hmm.
The animated series. So unfortunately, they both get the same score, but in my head, this is better. If I was to rank, this would be number 1, and then I would have the animated series be ranked number 2.
All right.
But
So
both are amazing.
So it looks like we're putting Spider-Man above X-Men in terms of the animated series conversation.
Yes. Now, if we're talking about theme songs, this is still number 1, and then I would go X-Men after that, the animated series, and then after that, other 2 or whatever.
Yeah,
but,
isn't it weird? The Spectacular Spider-Man is the only one with like words.
Yeah.
I think the Spider-Man show was just like radio, like it just, and it was I think Steven Tyler did the guitar for it.
Yeah.
Which is wild. Let's get that guy from Aerosmith. And they make that joke in the show where the symbiote suit, he's like changing into different outfits, and he's like, how about that guy from Aerosmith? And he turns into it. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But that is going to wrap us up for today. We do have our Fan Feedback Friday, and because we posted it during the holiday season and we didn't get a chance to get to it, this week, how do you think our favorite superheroes spend the holidays? All right, we have Batman alone because he doesn't have a family. Dark, I like it. Superman saving people, probably. Captain America handing out presents to the less fortunate, absolutely. Spider-Man having a nice dinner with Aunt May. Gamora does nothing because she's never heard of Christmas. Thanks, Anthony. That's a good one. All right, and I'm also going to say The Flash is giving out presents all around the world, pretending to be Santa.
All right.
And I'm going to say The Punisher's killing people still. Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy
sounds
holidays.
About right.
But if you guys want to participate in Fan Feedback Friday, it's super easy. Just go to our Facebook page every Friday between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It'll post there, so make sure you guys like the page while you're there and participate. We have a lot of fun, and it's always a good time. So if you guys want more of our content, though, you can find us on all the social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, all of it. So make sure you guys check that out. Just type in the Misfit Faction or Multiverse Fancast. Odds are you'll find some of our stuff. And also, you can find us on YouTube. Make sure you guys check out our YouTube channel. It's been a lot of work recently, so it's totally redone. Give it a listen. We have some older episodes of MF Uncensored there, so make sure you guys check those out as well. Whew. All right. Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Wow. I did a great job.
Golf clap.
Golf clap. Yeah, sports. But that is going to wrap us up for today. As always, I'm Paul.
I'm Ronnie.
And we'll be back in a flash.
See ya.